Good morning. That's a very important question. Did you sleep well? Because hopefully you will not sleep now during the day. So, how many anesthetists in the audience? So, should we cancel this talk and go on to the next one? All right. So, since Deepak has asked me to do this talk, I will go through the talk. It's not a conventional talk in the sense that I will not be talking about all the entire algorithm, etc., etc. So, what I'm going to talk about is how the ICU patients are different, what are the complications. I will not talk about the assessment, but I will talk a little bit about preparation. Something which might be new to some of you is the methods of pre-oxygenation that we should be using in the intensive care unit. Unanticipated difficulty airway in intensive care unit, where what is the place of the supraglottic airway devices. The front of the neck approach is obviously the last resort. I will spend a little bit of time about whether we should be doing a surgical versus needle cricothyrotomy. And there are lots of lessons to learn from what is called as the NAP4 audit. Many of you will be aware of this NAP4 audit, and then I will summarize that. So, the most important thing in ICU patients is that the waking up the patient is not an option. I mean, if you decide to intubate a patient, obviously you can't wake up the patient and then do it next time around or when some help is around. So that is the main difference, apart from all the differences such that you might have to do at the any time, there will not be any expert help available. The apnea time is significantly reduced, and I intend to show you a couple of studies about that, and they are always full stomach. There might be trauma. Fortunately, I don't do trauma, so I don't face this very often, but the surgeons often produce trauma, so I do come across about 20% patients who have had maxillofacial surgeries. The challenges related to location, when you go back to your units, make sure that you get rid of these challenges which are related to your location, in the sense that you should have a difficult airway cart. So ASA did a survey in the United States, and they found that hardly any significant number of units had difficult airway cart. How many of you have a difficult airway cart in your unit? Okay, so we are much better off than US, at least in this regard, in a very small sample. The two factors which again make this challenging is that because of the monitors and other things that are attached to the patient, and the type of bed that you may or may not have in the ICU, accessing the head end of the patient is a problem, and someone to get into this position without moving you too much is a challenge often, because the cubicle is very small, and all of them tend to happen during the night when nobody is around. So the person who is intubating these patients is not very experienced. So obviously you will have lots of complications. This study particularly looked at supervised intubations. So if you have a consultant supervising the process, then obviously you would expect that the number of complications will be less. But that did not happen in this study. 16% patients still had some kind of problems, and another 4 patients had new infiltrates, suggesting that the patients aspirated during it. So the same NAP4 audit found that they had, when they compared with the previous studies, there was a high incidence of hypoxemia, hypotension, etc. in the critically ill patients when they were intubated in the ICU. The NAP4 audit also showed that there are technical problems. in the sense that cricoid pressure was not given, suction was not available, or other adjunct devices were not available. The most glaring part is that capnography was not used in a large number of patients. And we all know that capnography is essential to confirm intubation. When they looked at their own study, the intubations which were performed out of the operating rooms, either in the emergency department or in the ICU, had a significant incidence of hypotension and hypoxia. And as compared to the OT patients, you will find that this short duration of hypoxia, even if it is very short, you still have significant brain injury and hypoxic brain damage in these patients. So this is how we do it in the operating rooms. The most important part that I am going to emphasize on is having the equipment ready and having a plan ready. We often tend to forget, or maybe the person who is working in the ICU may not be an anesthetist by training, and then they can face these problems because they are not used to this kind of problem. So we know the definitions of difficult airway. I am just going to talk about a CVCI situation in more detail. So if you can ventilate the patient even without intubating the patient and maintain the oxygenation, the problems are going to be much less as compared to when you cannot even oxygenate the patient. So it is not the failure to ventilate which kills the patient or causes the brain damage. It is the failure to oxygenate that kills the patient. And the most important thing is the more senior the person, the bigger is the ego. Okay, he refuses to accept that he cannot intubate a particular patient. So limiting the number of attempts to 3 or less is something which we should keep in mind. The second thing that we need to keep in mind is that the radiolaryngoscopes look very attractive, but if you have not used them before, then there is no point in using them directly in an emergency because it's not going to work. Never works. Okay, so suddenly you can't go and do a disco dance when you have never done it before, right? So this is a very old study. Now some of you may have been in their 3rd standard and 4th standard. That's when this paper came out. And what they did was they built a model. So this is not actual patients. They built a model and they looked at how long it took for the patients to desaturate. And this is not a critically ill patient study. This is only post-operative patients. But we know that patients who have undergone a major surgery will have reduced FRC for a variety of reasons. And if you try to intubate, look at the time available to you for intubating the patient before the patient starts desaturating. So as compared to the standard adult where you can almost always get apnea time of about 3 minutes, in these patients it will be 60 or 90 seconds. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. In this study was later published, they continued their standard practice and they pre-oxygenated the patient using a face mask for 4 minutes. And the PaO2 hardly increased, you can see. And in a large number of patients, nearly 40% of patients, the increase in the oxygenation was less than 5%. So that usual pre-oxygenation hardly works. Only 6% patients had an increase greater than 50 millimeters of mercury. And immediately after that, this paper came out from Samir Jaber's unit. So instead of the usual pre-oxygenation, they divided the patients in 2 groups. Okay, so the patients got high FiO2 by mask for half an hour. Then they randomized the patient to the usual method versus spontaneous breathing. So patients were not given a muscle relaxant, and they were allowed to breathe on a pressure support mode with a small amount of PEEP. They did one ABG after that and then intubated the patient, and then the patients were put on mechanical ventilation. What they found was that there was a significant increase in oxygen parameters in the NIV group, and if you have such high partial pressure of oxygen before intubation, you obviously get more time to intubate the patient. And this difference persisted even after 30 minutes after intubation. So non-invasive ventilation before the patient is given a muscle relaxant, because if you try to give patients volume control or pressure control ventilation, those patients are going to aspirate. So this has to be done before the muscle relaxant is given and before the patient is put to sleep. I am sure most of you are aware of the high frequency nasal cannula oxygenation. You might be using it in ARDS patients, but I think it's an appropriate place to use high frequency nasal cannula even when you are pre-oxygenating the patient, because you can give large flows, and because of the large flow, there is some amount of PEEP that is generated. So it's supposed to be 1 centimeter per 10 liters of flow that you give. So you will get at least 6 PEEP if the patient is breathing with his mouth closed. It humidifies the oxygen, and the nasal prongs are very easy to apply, and they are very comfortable for the patient. So you can put this on before you start the procedure, and it can be left in place because it doesn't come in your way. For example, if you put a face mask, you have to remove the face mask and then intubate the patient. Here the cannula can stay in place while you are intubating, and some oxygen can still go in when the patient is apneic. So this is how it looks like, and this nasal cannula is a snugly fitting cannula. So I will not go into details about how it works. Unfortunately, in spite of these theoretical advantages, we don't have evidence, because there have not been many studies which have evaluated usual pre-oxygenation with HFNCO. So you have this DAS guidelines, 4 phases: how to prepare the patient equipment, how to prepare the team, and how do you prepare for the difficulty. So it is better to prepare for a difficulty even if you know that the intubation is going to be easy, because then in case you run across a patient with difficult intubation, you are already ready for that. So the first answer to the first question is that we can't wake up the patient, right? I mean, otherwise why would we have gone ahead and intubated this patient in the first place? And then what is important is to have a plan ready. So if you give drugs and try intubation, doesn't work, what are you going to do next? And for this, your difficult airway cart is going to be of help. So you have to somehow pre-oxygenate the patient and then continue to oxygenate the patient during the period where you have come across the unanticipated difficult intubation and you are deciding or preparing your equipment to intubate the patient. And plan D is obviously the front of the neck ups. And then the team leader should generally ask, does anybody have any suggestions or concerns? So this is from the Difficult to Air Society of UK. And simple steps: plan A is laryngoscope and intubation, plan B is rescue oxygenation, and plan D is front of the neck access. So if you come across a failed intubation, so you have made your 3 attempts and you have failed to intubate the patient, then you have to try the rescue oxygenation, And I am not going to spend too much time on this because the laryngeal mask airway will perform adequately. Most of you are familiar with this, that you have to really make an attempt to fail to put the laryngeal mask in place, right? Anybody can put it. There are n number of studies in patients whose airways were successfully managed in the field by the paramedics with little practice. Even someone tries to put the LMA in place without having any experience, any practice, most of the times they succeed unless there is a difficult anatomy or trauma. So if that rescue oxygenation doesn't work, then you have to declare what is called as CVCI situation, and obviously you should be asking for help the moment your first attempt fails. So by then hopefully you would have reached, and these guidelines or most guidelines recommend scalpel cricothyroidotomy, and I will try and explain in the end how why needle cricothyroidotomy is not preferred over the scalpel thyroidotomy. Okay, so the procedure is fairly simple. You take a horizontal incision at the cricothyroid membrane, and then reverse the blade, put it in the wound and rotate the blade. So when you rotate the blade, it acts as a dilator, and by the side of that you can put in a small cuff tube. So this gives you a semi-permanent kind of airway through which you can oxygenate the patient, and then later on you can convert it to a tracheostomy, because then it gives you time to get help or get surgical help if required and do a proper surgical tracheostomy in these patients. So you are all familiar with this needle cricothyroidotomy, how to connect the cannula to the syringe and then universal connector and the ambu bag, etc., etc. That's what we have been traditionally taught, and ideally you should be also using what is called as a jet ventilator. Okay, because the ambu bag ventilation, flush wall, etc., etc., doesn't work. I will show in next couple of slides. So what are the problems? So if you have a needle cricothyroidotomy in place and the patient's glottis is open, okay, so you are doing it below the cords, right? So the oxygen will take the path of least resistance. So if you are trying to ventilate a lung model, obviously you can't do a randomized control trial in this sort of situation. There is hardly any amount of oxygen or oxygen air mixture reaching the patient's lungs, and the smaller the size of the needle that you are using, longer is the time for exhalation. So if you look at the bottom there, if you have a small orifice, 500 ml toilet volume which you are delivering very very quickly, takes half a minute to come out, and so on and so forth. So if you reach a 4 milliliter orifice, the same tidal volume comes out in 4 seconds. So it gives you some time to actually ventilate the patient as well. So this was a very very interesting study. What they did was they made a trachea out of the plastic tubing, and they had a test lung attached to that. And what they also had at the other end or the upper end of the airway was a adjustable restriction, so where they could adjust the size of the glottis, right? And then they put in cannulas, you can see it in the diagram there, facing towards the lung, from 13 to 20 gauges, and they compared various devices about to see how much oxygen or how much tidal volume is delivered and how much goes to the lung and how much escapes from the top. So in this table you can see that there is no airway obstruction, so the restriction is 0 there at the upper airway. And even when you are using a very good oxygenation device, like Manujet, you are getting only 13.5 liters per minute ventilation. Oxygen flush, ambu bag, three-way tap, no oxygenation at all when the upper airway is open. So if you have a patient where you cannot intubate the patient because of some other kind of anatomical difficulty, you are hardly going to be able to ventilate the patient using either the ambu bag or oxygen flush bag, even if the size of the cannula is 13 gauge, right? But if you have a patient who has got, say, CA glottis or a laryngeal tumor where the airway is partially or completely occluded, the minute ventilation goes up for all the devices. So ideally you should be using at least a 13 or 14 gauge needle. So there also with a 14 gauge needle with the flow of with ambu bag is very minimal, right? So this just tells you that if you are planning to use needle cricothyrotomy, you are going to face significant difficulties, and therefore most guidelines recommend scalpel cricothyrotomy or a kit, cricothyrotomy kit, which allows you to put in a top tube. Okay, the second point I wanted to emphasize again was that we talked about using video laryngoscope in an emergency for the first time, right? Here, this is just an abstract, but it's more than 10,000 cases where video laryngoscopy was used as a first device, and the success rate was 99.1%. Okay, so there are many studies which show that when you use video laryngoscope, uh, the Cormack-Lehane grade increases at least by 1. So you first attempt it with a usual Mac blade, and then you see the same airway with a video laryngoscope. The grade or visibility of the chords is much better. So what I am trying to suggest is that you should, if you are going to use video laryngoscope in your ICU, and in this study when the video laryngoscopy failed in the first attempt, they again use a different kind of video laryngoscope in the same patients, and they are able to rescue about 60-70% patients out of the 93 where they failed to intubate, and they woke up some patients and did not intubate, and they put in a LMA in another number of patients. But none of the patients had any hypoxic brain damage or any brain injury, and this was carried out in the operating rooms. So our success rates are going to be lesser than this because we will be working in the ICU. But the idea is that why not work with a device which is better at giving you the glottic tube. The other problem with video laryngoscope is that the angle that you are used to with your Mac blade, where you are saying that you are aligning the axis, but the video laryngoscope looks at the glottis from around the corner. It's not directly looking at it, and therefore your tube placement, when you go back and attempt it in your patients, you will realize that your tube keeps going towards the trachea, towards the esophagus, and not the tracheal opening. So you are in a peculiar position where you can actually see the cords, but not able to put the tube through the cords, and for that takes some practice, and that's why it's very easy when you see someone else doing it on the monitor, but when you do it yourself you tend to fail. Okay, so you are likely to spend more time in a patient whose apnea time is reduced, and therefore you must attempt it in patients who have good reserve, and then attempt this in in the patients in the ICU. So what do we do in my unit? We are using NIV for all patients before we give the drugs to the patients, unless there is problem with the mask fit or the patient is not cooperative at all, etc. The high flow nasal cannula machines, we are lucky we have about 10 or 12 of them for a 30 bed ICU. So that's always available. And it's not very costly at all. It's quite cheap. Obviously the disposables are expensive, but you can use them in the Indian way. So the cost will come down. If you can't do anything, you can just give oxygen using nasal prongs maximum flow that is allowed by your flow meter, that is 15 liters throughout the procedure. So what we do is generally we'll put the cannula, the nasal prongs in place and pre-oxygenate or give NIV on top of that. Most intubations are supervised, fortunately, at least in my unit. Though there is no consultant during the night hours, most intubations tend to take place during the daytime, which is just lucky, I guess. So the next audit might show a completely different thing. LMA Classic is part of our difficult airway tray. There are two types of video laryngoscopes. One is a MAC-D, which is always available 24 hours round the clock, and we have a King Vision, which is a disposable one, but that has come through donation, so that is about to disappear now because we have used many of them. And the other important thing is cricothyroid membrane position is always checked by the person who is intubating and someone who is helping out. So that is something that we need to get used to doing, because knowing that cricothyrotomy can be done when you are in trouble is different than getting into the habit of, sometimes you can't actually palpate the cricothyroid membrane, obese patients, neck tumors, etc. And then ultrasound at the bedside can help in locating the cricothyroid membrane, which is extremely easy. Unless you are dealing with a real fat patient, then anyway God will help you. Alright, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much.